Welcome to the party. Look at this dog. Look at her go. She's so cute. I love her so much. Hello. Let's focus. Okay. Okay, good morning. It's been a couple weeks since I have started the process, and I will let you watch the whole vlog start to finish so you get the kind of organic ideas unfolding. So we start with just straight up brainstorming, and then we go into, I'll show you kind of a peek of my outline without really explaining every piece, and then I will work on filling out my outline, and then I'll talk you through my main cast of characters, and at the end I will tell you kind of the overall story that I have settled on. So sit back, enjoy, ask me all the questions you want. I will try to get to them and talk through it with you. And thank you for watching. Today is gonna be a good, productive day. I have no plans except to clean my house and prep for Nano. So here we go. I have a few ideas. I'm gonna just start stream of consciousness writing things down and kind of seeing what sticks, seeing how things flow. This is the fun part, but this is also the overwhelming part for me because there's just like so much potential. So let's brainstorm.
Yeah.
I think we're onto something.
Hey.
Alright, I think I've decided. I'm really having fun already with this. Let's talk about this. I started just listing like options, like randomly whatever came to mind. I even wrote down romance ? Because I like surprised myself that I even came into my head. But mostly my first idea had to do with like, what if witchcraft but capitalism? Like what if witchcraft was like superpowers and it was in this world, like witches and magic was subject to politics and capitalism like every other industry. So I was playing with that for a little bit and it's interesting, but I couldn't really think of the best like avenue that I would want to tell that story and explore that world, or any characters weren't really coming up. So then I started thinking about other kind of soft magic ideas, because I would like to play with like soft magic or maybe some magical realism or something. And somehow I got to thinking about all of those games, like video games where you follow shopkeepers, and a lot of them are based in fantasy settings. So you're like a shopkeeper for all of these like magical chosen one heroes that come in to buy their axes and their beers and their armor and all of those things. But like in the game, you're just playing the shopkeeper and like restocking your shelves, and like you really like whatever those heroes are up to makes no difference to you as long as they're buying your wares, right? So then that made me think of D&D and how D&D can be really fun, but it can also be full of cliches and patterns, and don't get me wrong, D&D is really fun. But it just started to be really fun kind of exploring the idea of almost kind of making fun of this in a comedic way, like a parody of those kinds of games. Okay, so here's the concept I'm working with after like 30 minutes of brainstorming. We could follow like the fantasy marketplace of this generic like fantasy city where all of the travelers and heroes like pass through before their next quest, and they sleep at the inn and have a beer at the tavern and restock at the shopkeeper, get a new sword from a blacksmith, like that kind of thing. But it's like the reset button. So I really like the idea of creating a whole story around those people, because those are people who have lives, right? So then I was thinking about, well, this would be a really fun playground to explore a lot of these overdone fantasy tropes that really kind of I'm tired of as a fantasy reader. So it would give me this opportunity to kind of let the genre make fun of itself in a playful way by having kind of like overly cliched characters and dropping in random tropes. I know it sounds like this is gonna be the worst, and it might be, but that's not the point. I'm excited by, I think, how fun it would be. Like literally this would just be like a fantasy sandbox, which sounds great. You know, it's pretty low stakes. The shopkeeper wants his son to take over the family business, but his son secretly wants to become one of the heroes one day. And of course, the old man who owns the inn has a daughter who's beautiful but off limits. And there's this like hardened, never married, middle-aged tough woman who owns the tavern and is the barkeep, and you know, the blacksmith. And like, I love exploring all of those stereotypes that are so common in video games and in D&D, and like fleshing them out. And I know that I'm not the first asshole to write a book based on D&D, and it's not really gonna be that. I don't know. I obviously have like a lot more thinking to do, but I'm excited by the idea that I could still play with all of these fantastical elements in a really safe, controlled sandbox of just a humble marketplace. So that's what I'm working with. Too long, didn't read. The point is that it's extremely important that I take most of October to develop a really robust outline of all of the scenes that I can plan for in whatever this book turns into, so that I can freely let loose thousands of words every day in November, because otherwise I'm just going to be struggling with my outline and not actually writing the words. So the plan for like all of October is step 1, like what am I actually writing? But step 2, create some characters, organize my files, and start building up an outline. So we're gonna see how far we can get on that. Okay, it's been a few days, I won't lie. Now the next step is to figure out my characters, because this is the hardest part for me. Is I'll create the world, I'll get excited about the potential and the world building, that it's hard for me to hammer down a specific plot line or specific characters that I want to follow. So this is the theme, right? It's like, oh my god, what do I write? Is enough potential, like that's overwhelming. And then once I decide on like a concept, it's like, okay, great. But like within that concept, there's so much potential. What do I do? What do I write about? Who do I want to follow? And so then you'll see, once I pick characters and begin to build characters out, it's like, okay, but their whole lives, and I can make anything up. There's so much potential. What do I write about? So that's why I'm such a planner, is because those questions, those possibilities will paralyze me in November if I don't already know the answers. And if I don't already have the plot points about what's coming next, I just will freeze right up. So kudos to you if you have better decision-making muscles than I do and can just whip that stuff out. I can't. So I need to make all my decisions in October. And we're gonna do a little more of that today. Okay, so this is like my blank outline of a template of an outline that I, over the years, have just patchworked together from a bunch of different like outlining techniques. You can see it looks kind of insane. I have basically just taken one of my old outlines from a different story and clipped out all of like the story specific stuff, so it's just the bare bones. I won't go over all of this. I've been thinking about maybe doing a separate video of like specifically how I outline, since I am such an extreme planner, an extreme outliner, and I know that it can be overwhelming to find a system that works for you. So let me know if that's something that you would want to see more in depth, and we can go over my whole system here. I'll explain like what all of this means. But in general, I have this color coding that kind of goes over the acts and kind of the temperature as far as blue and red and yellow, meaning act 1, 2, and 3. Within each act, there's an inciting incident, progressive complications, crisis, climax, and resolution. And there's also an inciting incident for the whole story. There's crises and climaxes for the whole story and a resolution for the whole story. So this is the outline that has come from 10 years of doing NaNoWriMo, 10 years of writing my own creative stories. So if this is overwhelming, like, don't worry about it. This is what I'm comfortable with. Having this much structure is strangely liberating for me, to be honest. So it's easiest for me to click on, okay, well, in the middle of the second act, fun and games, this is a kind of an overview of what fun and games would look like. I know that it's the second act, the fourth block, need to have a little bit of a conflict since it's the middle of the fourth block, but it lands in the fun and games of the story structure, so it should have a bit of an inciting incident for the second block. That's a lot for me to go on, and so I can fit in what needs to happen on each of those little pieces. It's kind of like putting the puzzle together. So I feel like that may be really confusing, but again, like, let me know if you want me to do a more in-depth video about this kind of crazy specific outlining strategy I've built up over the years. I'd be happy to do that. But for now, I'm going to just try and fill in some basics of the basic bare bones of what I've thought about for this story so far. So I'm gonna put in kind of my overall thoughts, and then we're gonna go over to Pinterest and work on some characters and some mood boards and stuff like that. All right, so I have spent the last few days now tweaking this outline, filling things in. You can see how there's a column for sentence scene summary, which is just kind of basically what happens in this scene. And the next column over is supposed to be more of a paragraph explanation, but in this phase I really just use it as a notes section of things that need to happen, character beats I need to hit, random ideas that I have, such as what if this happened, this conversation should be in this scene. Those little things are usually in like that kind of notes column that later will turn into a more fleshed out paragraph summary. So I went through, I did most of the single sentence scene summaries, so at least I have an idea of the beats I need to be hitting throughout, and there's some notes and stuff on the side. And now the fun part, I went and I did the most fun Pinterest night. I poured myself a big glass of wine and I just went down a deep rabbit hole, deep dive of Pinterest fantasy art and just character art, and just started pinning things. So on Pinterest, I created a whole setting board of like what I envision the town and the marketplace and the world to kind of look like, but I also created a board for characters, and I didn't really have much of an idea of who I wanted the general cast to be. And as I was looking at characters, I was just kind of getting more and more inspired and had all of these ideas coming to me. And so I settled on a main cast of 9, which sounds like a lot. It is a lot. The main few people will really only be like 2 or 3, like the protagonist, antagonist, and the side character, you know? But in general, there's like 9 characters that matter in the book, if that makes sense. And then there's like random, unimportant filler characters, you know? So I Pinterested all of those characters, so I will show you a picture of them and kind of give you an overview of each of them, which if this is oversharing, then consider me an oversharer. But I think that AuthorTube could stand a little bit more transparency in this area. It's like, I'm not worried that, like, you can go ahead and use the same fan art that I found for free on the internet if you want to. You know what I mean? So like, whatever, I'm not worried about it. First up, main protagonist is Barty Shop. Mr. Barty Shop, S-H-A-W-P. He is my protagonist. He is human. He's just, you know, in his 50s, running his little market, his little shop, restocking his wares. Just a humble guy, humble, nice little round man selling his stuff. That's really it. Then his son, we have his son, Savarian Shop. who's a half elf. Mother is mysteriously not in the picture. There's trope number 1. He spends his time helping Barty, reluctantly helping Barty with the shop, and also kind of brooding and flirting with the ladies as they do. Trope number 2. Vinin McSmay, the blacksmith, who's a halfling, late 40s. He is firecracker, wily, wisecracking, heavy drinking dude, right? That's what you think of when you think of a blacksmith. But do you also think of having this sweet gay relationship with Barty the shopkeeper? Probably not. So that's a thing also. And I really love that. I love that Vinin the blacksmith and Barty the shopkeeper could have something special, you know? So he spends his time forging weapons and drinking beers and smooching the shopkeeper. Then we have the innkeeper, Linez Ultalanosha. She is a female dwarf in her 70s. She is not to be trifled with. She prides herself on her hospitality and tending to the patrons' needs, even though most of her inn patrons are these like messy, smelly, boorish heroes that come into town. But you know what? It is what it is, right? So she is maybe one of my favorites so far. Then we have her granddaughter, Zia Ultalanosha, who is a human. So her grandmother is a dwarf, Zia is a human. How did that happen? Big mystery. She spends her time working kind of a bakery out of the inn in the mornings and puts on this sweet, charming, humble, welcoming front to the patrons and her grandmother, but really on the side she's kind of this badass, hardened, like pirate character. So I'm really excited about her. Lots of mystery there as well. Next we have Ronnie the White, who is the bartender, tavern owner. She is a female gnome in her 50s and she is not to be trifled with. She is a retired hero. She came to this town for a quiet, simple, lucrative retirement running a tavern, and she finds it to be even more exciting and dangerous at times than her heroic days as a warrior dwarf. So, I don't know, I just really like her. She has a pretty good friendship with McSmay the blacksmith. She has this kind of fun dynamic with the travelers and the heroes that come through and frequent her tavern. She's just a cool lady, you know? I really like her, and I really like this art that I found. Then we have Ty Rosemary, the fortune teller, kind of mysterious lone wolf lady of the town. She's a 30-year-old human. She kind of keeps to herself and speaks in these like vague proverbs and metaphors, and she's kind of like the black sheep of the town. You know exactly the trope I'm going for here. And she runs a farm, like a vegetable farm. She reads fortunes for the travelers and kind of makes a living that way, but really she just wants to have this humble, quiet life of her own with no one to bother her, and I respect that. And then this next one is one of my very favorite tropes that I'm most excited about. So I have named this character Mike Farmer Jr. or MJ Farmer, because I wanted to play with the trope of like video games like Harvest Moon or Stardew Valley that have this like random nobody youngster farmer move to town for no reason to start a farm. So it's just like this random stranger moves to town to buy a plot of land and start a farm in this tiny town. So that's what this character is, MJ Farmer. He's a human in his late 20s, and I really like the idea of he and Ty Rosemary having this kind of farmer's rivalry, because before MJ moved to town, Ty had the monopoly mostly on having a vegetable garden and selling her farm wares and goat's milk and all of those kinds of things. So now that there's two farmers in town, there's this rivalry and also vague tension, if you know what I mean. So that's MJ. And then my last main character in the main cast is Bo Shen, the old fisherman human in his 60s. He's this kind of like scraggly old man who also speaks in like fishing metaphors and kind of friends with everyone yet close with no one, you know what I mean? He lives in his little fishing shack on the docks and teaches the youngsters how to fish, or tries to teach the youngsters how to fish. And again, I'm really stoked on this art that I found. This kind of like badass, like tattooed, bearded guy with a big hat and fishing rod. Like, that's exactly what I want. His tackle shop really doesn't get any business, so he sells most of his catches to the inn and the tavern to grill up for the feasting of the travelers that come to town. So he just has this kind of chip on his shoulder, yet he is this big softy on the inside. So that's the cast of characters that I'm working with, and there will be some side characters like spouses or children or other like little things like that, but they're not gonna matter too much, I don't think. I think these 9 I'm happy with, and they give me plenty to kind of work with. I feel like between the 9 of them, it's a pretty good picture of a balanced community and a sense of economy and all of those things for the little tiny town. Okay, so next I'm just gonna chat you through where I'm at in the storyline. I'm not gonna give you too many details. I know that I avoided telling you who the antagonist was, and it was on purpose, and I'll explain why. What is this story about, right? I made a big deal in my prep advice video on Sunday that you have to have the answer to that question, right? So what's your book about? My book is about the NPC characters in video games or D&D, and what happens when the NPCs become the heroes of their own story, kind of even without wanting to, right? So it just happens accidentally for them, and they find themselves needing to solve a mystery, solve problems, stand up for themselves, band together, all of those kinds of themes that we usually only see from the heroes, the chosen ones. So that's what my book is about. I'm really excited to explore a lot of the classic, sometimes overdone or annoying tropes that I often see in fantasy. I wanted to explore the lives of NPC characters and what happens when they are not just NPCs anymore. So the main villain, the big bad of the story, is, I'm tentatively calling the author. Not to mean myself, but to mean like the actual mysterious, insidious force in the story has this kind of uncanny power to write a story, to write the will and the actions of the characters. So they find themselves kind of in these repetitive loops because they're NPCs, and they sort of just repeat the day-to-day, week-to-week actions until one day things start to change, it starts to get a little weird, and they sort of notice each character acting a little differently with other characters, and it slowly unfolds that there is some kind of outside force that is rewriting their own loops, their own storylines, their own habits and actions and things like that. So what happens? They have to get creative to try and stay one step ahead of this author force. You know, they don't know where it's coming from. They don't really have the context of being heroes before. They've never done this before. So they're all kind of fresh, floundering newbies, beginning level 1 heroes, if you will. And they're all just kind of scrambling, trying to figure it out together. So eventually they find out that it's one of them. So one of those 9 characters, with like the exception of Barty, he's not the author, but one of those other 8 is the bad guy, or is the author. So we have kind of a secret antagonist, insidious force, which I like. And are they really bad? Is it really a bad thing to make these NPCs more cognizant of their lives and their action, and to force them to take more responsibility for their life, for their destiny, all of those kind of cliched themes. So it's kind of asking that question. The morally gray trope I really like to see. It's not a thriller. I don't know that I could write a wonderful thriller because I'm a wimp myself. But a mystery for sure. So I like the idea of writing a mystery in this very classic fantasy marketplace D&D kind of setting, where it's like, we are not focused on the fantasy elements whatsoever. We're worried about solving the mystery. I'm excited to write a very character-focused fantasy tale. And I'm excited to write a mystery in this setting. I'm excited to kind of play in the sandbox of experimenting with these stereotypical tropes and really getting to know these characters and work with kind of the NPC turned into heroes kind of theme. That's really the underlying thing, is how much control does anyone really have of their life and their choices, especially the kind of robot NPCs that we think of as being only there to serve the greater purpose of the story, or the heroes that come through town. Also, kind of like Westworld, if you've watched Westworld, it's like playing on that question of, do they deserve a life of their own? Do they deserve to make their own choices? And why haven't they been doing those things before? So those are the questions that I'm excited to explore. That's kind of a blurb overview of the vague plot and the force the author insidious force we'll be dealing with. The main cast of 9 characters will be exploring, 8 of which are kind of suspects for you to figure out, and we will go from there. You can expect many more vlogs from me during November. I will be vlogging not every day, but like I'll be taking clips from my daily experience sprinting my 1667 words and putting them into either weekly or every other weekly vlogs throughout the month. And I will also be making other AuthorTube content throughout the rest of October and November and beyond, so stick around if this is your thing. I also make videos about books and feminism and some woo-woo stuff here and there. I've done a pick a card reading, and I am excited to do some more. So thank you very much for watching. I'm excited to hear your thoughts and answer your questions, whatever questions you may have, and I hope that you're excited for NaNoWriMo, and I will see you on Friday. Bye.